Welcome back to Pilates with Taylor. I'm so happy that you're here. As always, it is such a pleasure to get to move with you, but today we're going to be switching things up a little bit, and I want to talk about some of the things that will make your Pilates practice a little bit better, just kind of give you a better understanding of what's going on in the Pilates world and understand some of the directions and cues that maybe I or other teachers that you work with will give you as you go throughout your Pilates journey. So I've got a list of 5, maybe we'll get to 6 different words, phrases that come up a lot in the Pilates industry. And let's just dive in. Let's give a little bit of descriptions. So thing number 1, and I feel like this is maybe the most important thing when it comes to Pilates, is powerhouse. What is your powerhouse? I know that I say it a lot. I know that other teachers say it, but I think sometimes it's a little bit confusing what we mean by powerhouse. So in Pilates, your powerhouse is basically your entire torso. So from mid-chest to your hips is considered your powerhouse. That is where your power is coming from. In Pilates, we always work from the center out. So we want to make sure we're engaging our core, make sure we're engaging our back, maybe even those upper glutes, making sure our shoulders are plugged into our body. The powerhouse encompasses so much more than just like the core or the abs that we think of when we do workouts or like core workouts. So really making sure that you're engaging your entire powerhouse, which again is basically from your shoulders to the hip. Your entire torso is considered your powerhouse. And that is where all of our movements come from. All of our movements flow from inside out. So that was number 1 with our powerhouse. Number 2 that comes up so often is the idea of an imprinted spine. So sometimes you might hear a neutral spine, sometimes you might hear imprinted. Those are not the same thing. So neutral spine is what happens when you're just like standing, sitting, walking around in the world. Your neutral spine is how your body is when you're not putting any thought into it. An imprinted spine is if you are lying on your mat or on the on the carriage if you're on a reformer, and you can feel every single vertebrae pushed into the mat. Normally, a neutral spine has curves. It's almost like an S shape if you're looking at it from the side. An imprinted spine is fully flat, essentially as flat as you can get it. It requires a lot more effort. Again, it requires engaging that powerhouse, bring those ribs into your body in order to flatten out that spine behind you. So that is the idea of an imprinted spine. You've definitely heard me say that in some classes before, but I just really want to make sure that we're thinking imprinted spine, whether you're on a mat or on a reformer, is making sure that your entire vertebrae, your entire spine is imprinted into the mat below you. I like to think of if the mat or reformer was wet sand and you were laying down in wet sand, if you got up, could I see the outline of every single vertebrae? And that is your imprinted spine. The third thing that I think it's so important to know if you're in the Pilates world is who Joseph Pilates was. A lot of people don't realize that Mr. Pilates was a real person. He existed. Pilates was invented, if you will, created by Mr. Pilates in the early 1900s. He was a German boxer, circus performer, whole litany of things, who had found himself in England and actually was in a prison camp, in an internment camp, and he created Pilates, also originally known as contrology, like the science of control. Originally invented contrology in a prison camp in England in the early 1900s, which I think is fascinating. We think of Pilates as being this very delicate, very girly, feminine thing, but again, it was really created by a man for other men who were dealing with injuries, which I just think is so cool that we have been able to come in and really make it our own while still maintaining really, really closely to the original exercises of Mr. Pilates, Joseph Pilates. He died in, I believe, the 1960s, passed on his lineage to a few of his proteges, Romana Krakowski. I just butchered that last name. I'm so sorry. Kathy Grant, Jay Grimes, they are all direct workers with Mr. Pilates. And it's just so cool to be able to see something that was invented by a single person be able to be in existence to this day, 100 years later. And that was actually a twofer because we got Joseph Pilates and we got contrology, the original name for Pilates. All right, number 4 is reformer. Obviously, we do a lot of mat Pilates. If you are on YouTube, if you're hanging out with me, we do a lot of mat Pilates. But the reformer is an apparatus that Mr. Pilates invented that has a bunch of springs, kind of like a pulley system with some straps for your hands and your feet to really work different muscles and at different angles. I personally do classical Pilates, and the reformers are created to exact specifications that directly mirror what Mr. Pilates did. We use leather straps because we get a lot of tension with that. We use wooden handles that go across your hand so you get more feedback there. There are 4 evenly weighted springs. So the machines, the apparatuses definitely differ depending on the school of Pilates that you are in, but there's always a reformer. There's always a movable carriage, which is that bed on top of it. There will always be arm straps that you can use for leg straps as well. A movable foot bar in order to really work that range of motion. And your reformer was actually designed to help you get better at mat Pilates. So the goal, the pinnacle of Pilates, if you will, is actually mat Pilates. And all of these apparatuses, all of these props are just designed to make your mat Pilates even stronger. Reformer is the most popular, I think, right now, but there are also things like the tower, the high chair, the ladder barrel, the Cadillac. Like there are so many other apparatuses as well that we don't really need to get into today. But yeah, I just want to make sure you guys knew all about the reformer. I'll see if I can add a little picture maybe right here of what a reformer looks like if you guys aren't aware, but it's a really fun piece of equipment. And actually, they like to say apparatus, not equipment, because an equipment does work for you. An apparatus helps you do work. So you are really the one controlling the machine. Again, going back to contrology, like Mr. Pilates wanted. But it's just a really fun apparatus. My favorite right now is the tower. Surprisingly, I used to hate the tower, but it's just a really good time. And if you have the opportunity to try out a reformer class, I know that sometimes they're on ClassPass, I would definitely recommend doing that. They hit your body in such a different way, and you'll really be able to see a lot of parallels with what we do on the mat on the reformer. I also have several classes where we talk about doing the reformer on the mat. There's a set sequence that most people go through when you are on the reformer if you're doing classical Pilates like what I do. And I just think it's really fun to be able to bring elements from that very classical sequence and do it in a new way with you guys on the mat. So that was reformer. The next thing that comes up very often is the idea of your sits bones. So this is something going back to powerhouse. It's a body part. You probably have heard me refer to your sits bones as well. And basically your sits bones are those two, like if I'm sitting almost a little bit more up on myself, like with my pelvis shifted below me, there's 2 little bony bits on either side of my tailbone. Those are my sits bones. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know if sits bone is the actual anatomical name for that. That's always what we've called it in Pilates and when I've done yoga. But those sits bones are what you usually use to anchor onto the mat. So if we're doing something like, even if we're doing something like a roll up where we're just going from lying down all the way up, you really want to feel those sits bones anchor into the mat as you pivot your pelvis as you come up. Those sits bones are almost like a landmark. Think of them as a bony landmark that you can use to indicate the end of your powerhouse, like we talked about earlier, but also to make sure that you're grounding yourself properly. You'll also hear me say things like, bring your sits bones through your heels if you're already lying on your back. And that's just a cue to be able to tilt that pelvis again, pivot that pelvis to make sure that you are getting that imprinted spine that we talked about on the mat underneath you. So your sits bones aren't anything that you have to necessarily be super present of every single moment of every single class, but it is just a really great landmark to help you understand some of the cues that I or your other instructors will give you. And then one last term that gets thrown around a lot, or phrase that gets thrown around a lot, is your Pilates V. And that is just the stance of your feet that is present on the reformer or on the mat. You'll hear me say the Pilates V a lot. That is essentially first position in ballet. If you were a dancer, Pilates, contrology, has its roots in dance. There's a very strong dance culture with Pilates. So there's a lot of overlap between the two. So essentially your Pilates V is your feet are in a V. Your heels are together. Your toes are about a fist width distance apart. That really makes sure that you're elongating through your inner thigh and getting as much stretch out of this part of your body as possible. It also just provides a more stable base for you, and it opens up your hips. So there's a lot of benefits from using your Pilates V. You'll see in things like rolling like a ball, I talk about our Pilates V. If we are on our stomach and we're doing beats or we're swimming, a lot of times I'll have you guys start in your Pilates V. And that is always, if you're ever in doubt about what to do with your feet, just go ahead and pop them in a Pilates V. You'll never be wrong with that. So it's definitely just a good thing to keep in mind. Heels together, toes apart, and your toes, the like balls of your big toes are about a fist width distance apart. That's your Pilates V. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me for this quick Pilates terminology rundown. I'm sure there are so many more terms that I could get into. So if there's anything else that you have questions about, or you just maybe have a little bit of confusion about, go ahead and pop those terms in the comment. I would love to just make sure that everybody is as informed as they can be about all the different terminology in Pilates. I know the first time I walked into a studio, I felt like everyone was speaking a different language, and I want to make sure that we make things as easy and accessible for you guys. I know sometimes Pilates can feel a little bit inaccessible, a little bit elitist, but it shouldn't, and I really want it to be something that is a resource for everybody. I know how much better it's made me feel in my own body, and I really want other people to experience that as well. All right, you guys, I have loved getting to chat with you, and we'll see you on the mat next time. Bye.